when you make a new archetype like that, it often comes with new mechanics, and melee mechanics when you add them, like for example when we added block, the way that worked, suddenly then require a bunch of monster work as well, because the monsters have to be able to deal with that, so they are hard to add.
I'm ready for it. I am ready for it. I'm expecting another, half dozen to dozen full reiterations on every single monster and boss.
Redo every boss, please.
Yep.
When those other classes are ready for prime time, yes, it'll come with another set of boss challenges and things that we have to do with that. But you really do need to do that to make the classes work. And look, this is even true for stuff that isn't melee, right? Like when we did all that stuff for summoners, that was also like a whole boss rework. So almost any class you add, it's a whole boss rework again, because if the class is unique enough to actually be different, then it implies that it's unique enough for it to be different with regard to what the boss has to do to respond to it as well. Yeah. So
it was the same with range, same with cast while moving, right? Like all of a sudden now every single ranged boss, as long as you're just moving, nothing will hit you. So change to AI, change to how some of the tracking works, change to projectile speeds, all kinds, everything. Every single thing to do with the character class changes, and we have to do the rest. And you could argue there's an ideal world where it's like make all the character classes, then make the monsters, but they feed into each other. And so you do have to be making them in parallel, and you do have to pay the cost of when you change one thing, you're going to have to change everything else. And I suspect that is ultimately where a lot of games kind of maybe aren't willing to put in that grind. It is speculative, but I could see, because it is a absolute ton of work. Like, it's crazy.
It makes it, I think, in general, our studio takes more risks. Like, we're more willing to make a fundamental change and then explore all the repercussions of that. And that's true both for Path of Exile 2's development, where we've done this kind of stuff and it's had a lot of repercussions and honestly slowed down the release schedule. Like WASD certainly delayed like Path of Exile 2 for sure. But also in PoE 1 as well, where we're we make big changes and we sort of on some level have to see what happens and respond to that. But it makes for much more interesting releases, and we get all the time the question of, how do you release so much content? How do you make, how are your expansions so big? And well, the answer is to that, we take risks. If you're not willing to take risks, then you will get a much smaller end result. You
have to be willing to redesign every boss again for the fifth time.
And it's pretty easy for a lot, not that we don't really have it here, but it's very easy for people to get lost in let's have 100 hours worth of meetings discussing this change before even committing to it, where we're just like, let's go, let's do it. Let's just see what happens.
Change, see what happens. We can always revert it. There's been plenty of things as well that we've made changes to, and then we've changed back to how PoE 1 did it. There's been all sorts of stuff like that as well. And it's funny as well. It's like you'll make a change that's to fix a PoE 1, a problem that PoE 1 had, and then you'll realize that the problems that it causes are worse than the problems that PoE 1's thing had, so we just change it back again. So that's happened more than a few times, that's a learning experience as well.
Of course, we have gone back to monsters giving flask charges, so that you do get flasks back. It's not as much as PoE 1, but
so reduced for regular monsters.
Still does it.
Right. So the intention basically was that at some point we just said, okay, right, there's two ways we can go with this. We were like, okay, we could solve the flask problem by removing town portals. It might seem a bit weird, but it's effectively we were saying we could go that way, where it's you're actually expected to conserve your flasks and use them sparingly, and then but you can't go back to towns, or rather if you do go back to town, you can't go back to exactly where you came back from. Or we can just say, okay, because if we're not doing that, that means that we are effectively saying that you shouldn't have to run out of flasks during regular gameplay, because that is not a reason. It doesn't feel good to just go to town and come back again just for that.
There's no advantage to that gameplay. Exactly.
So effectively we decided to go back to more what PoE 1 had, where the expectation is that if your flasks are correctly sized for your character, and your skills are not outrageously costed and things like that, if you're playing normally, you shouldn't be running out of flasks generally, or at least it's very rare to do so. So generally speaking, speaking, with the balance we're trying to achieve is, you don't have to go back to town just for flasks, except maybe once in a blue moon because of some special situation that might happen.
Yeah, so if you're obliterating your flasks, it's a sign that you're currently struggling.
Yes.
Something's going wrong.
There-
You need to evaluate.
Exactly.
There's one other pretty important axis there, which is that the number of checkpoints in an area is quite a lot higher than it used to be. So it was often that you'd enter the area, then there's one for the boss, and that's it. Now you're often probably getting 3, sometimes even more in an area, because it isn't really enjoyable. If maybe dying once and having to re-clear an area because you never got to the boss isn't too bad, but if you're the kind of player that dies a few times, it can get pretty taxing having to re-clear an entire area. So we've made sure there's a lot more checkpoints going on, which obviously gives you back all your flask charges as well, which is helping definitely a lot.
And generally speaking, there'll be about 3, and for example, if we've got any kind of multi-story areas, there'll generally be a checkpoint between each story. If we've got any time there's some kind of point of interest, we generally put a checkpoint there, if there's something to find or do there. We're making sure that generally speaking, any kind of quest objective that you're doing through the area, there'll be a checkpoint before and after each boss fight and things like that. There's a lot more of that because death is supposed to be something that actually happens to you in PoE 2, and so therefore we need to make the penalty for that very low, very minimal, compared to what we did in the past.
Yeah, we're going to kill you, but we're going to make it fun, not
for sure. You need to get back in the action very quickly.
Not a massive groan.
Exactly. And the thing in the end as well that I think clinched it with the flasks is Chris said to me, the reason you should be going back to town is because you're excited to ID your items, not because you've run out of flask charges.
Good.
So
That makes sense.
That was the kind of moment of all right.
You got to try these things so that you can better understand what it is that makes it important. Well, talking on changes that you're experimenting with, you mentioned that you think that maybe leveling skills isn't what you should do normally, through XP.
Yes, so we've changed now the system. I'm actually really happy with this change. So there was always this thing in PoE 1 where the question would always come up, why do I have to manually level my skills? And there were reasons for that, which obviously don't matter anymore. But effectively, the question we should have been asking was not so much having to defend why that was needed or talking about whether or not we need auto leveling, all that sort of stuff. What we should have been asking is, why, if leveling a skill, if this is being asked, that would imply that leveling a skill was not fun. And if leveling a skill isn't fun, what should we be doing to make leveling a skill fun? And then I asked myself, I went right back to D2 and I was like, why was getting a skill point in D2 a good experience and feeling like that maddening, and there's another skill point, I'm going to allocate it, why was that fun? And the answer was simply that there was choice. So we realized that getting skill levels needs to be a thing that has choice involved in it. So what we decided to do is make it so that we already had the system of uncut skill gems where when you find you don't just find a random skill gem or even get offered them as quest rewards in the same way anymore. You have an uncut skill that lets you pick what skill you get. And so you've got a more traditional looking skill screen there. And we already had an issue of what do I do with extra uncut skill gems once I've already got all the skills that I need? And it turns out that it is actually making the change so that using an uncut skill gem in a given tier will level up an existing skill to that tier, to that level. Was a change that meant that suddenly you open the skill screen do I pick a new skill? Do I level up an old skill? It also means that getting more uncut skill gems, you get more of those things. It feels more important. Getting a skill to level 20 is now not something that can happen. You have to actually get high level content to get level 20 uncut gems to be able to level up
finding a specific thing.
Yeah, exactly. You're finding a specific thing. It's made the whole thing way more fun in my opinion. But the other thing it also does, which I think was not something I expected before we did it, but then I realized after we did it that it was cool, was that having you now have a situation where some skills are under-leveled and some skills can be over-leveled, and it's you have to think about what skill do I want to do this, what skill can I kind of let lag behind a little bit, and what skill and how long do I let it go before I need to catch this thing up, due to the fact that certain combos and skills that damn it, I forgot the name of the skill again, the one we respond to a stunned enemy.
Bone Shatter.
Bone Shatter, damn it. Because Bone Shatter does a lot of damage when you land it, you actually don't necessarily need to level that one up because you're already kind of overkilling stuff with it a lot of the time. So like, I can actually let that one languish. I actually want to be increasing, my double slam, and then now once Bone Shatter is like 3 levels out of date, you're like, man, now I need to level that up. So like, there's actually quite a lot of things, and so it actually made it much more interesting, that leveling up process, and it actually allowed us also to change where the new skills were coming in a little bit, because there was a lot more interest around which ones you're leveling up. And it even, I think, there was some interest around the support gems as well, and how that interacts with the whole thing. So I'm very happy with this change, and to me it was like, it felt like we out of nowhere and very easily suddenly had a whole character progression system out of nowhere that we previously didn't have before somehow. And as soon as he did it, it was just a great change.
That was just like, the game's now just 50% better.
Yeah.
Just out of nowhere. It was where did this even come from? We never even thought about changing, like how gems level up. And this is why it's been so important to question all of the fundamentals.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny because the actual work to do that change is like so minor.
Yeah.
And yet like it just had such a big impact.
Oh yeah, I just got all this bonus game for free.
Something like that.
That cost me nothing to do.
It did have one ramification that we had to account for, which comes into play with all the like random things you're finding throughout the world, which is that because leveling up gems is then RNG based, you could get extremely unlucky.
Yep.
All of a sudden, your gems are way under-leveled. So that's where a lot of all those special features are giving...
Like hard-coded drops.
Hard-coded skilled uncut gems.
That rare monster hiding in a house somewhere that will always give you an uncut gem.
Exactly.
So those are there to ensure your baseline.
Exactly.
With this skills system as well.
Yeah. So
the other cool thing is it can skip. So like if you fight... So let's say it is a very under-leveled and you've got a tier 4 skill and you want to... you're at the point where you're finding, say, tier 8 skills... if you use a tier 8 gem, you can level it from 4 straight to 8. So it doesn't have to go 4, then to 5, then to 6, then to 7 every time.
Power, satisfying power spikes.
Yeah, the funny thing about that is that initially, when we were talking about this, there was the concern about it with the somber smithing stones or whatever from Elden Ring. Like that was like a whole thing where like sometimes you'd have annoying situations where you wouldn't have one of the ones in the progression up because of the fact you can skip all the way up. It actually means that it's fine. Like as soon as you find a high level one, you just go straight there.
I can't go to level 10 because I don't have a level 7.
Right, exactly. So you don't have that kind of problem. You just go straight up, and so that was really important to know to do correctly. It's been a really great change.
Absolutely incredible change, like out of nowhere as well. It was just oh my god,
this game sound keen on it. I need to try it out.
Evolved everything. I was like, holy.
I need to try this out. Do you feel like it had the same impact on support gems that's doing that too?
Well, the thing with support gems that so support gems don't have levels in PoE 2, so they don't do that. So the thing with the support gems, of course, is the way that we now have that recommendation system, and that I think has been a bit of a game changer.
I played around with that.
So you have seen a bit of it, but you haven't had as much of it as you should have because now there's a lot more support gems working. There's a lot more of them. Like there was a pretty minimal number in the build that you were playing. The build we have now, obviously we're starting to fill that out. The goal is to have the other interesting thing with the recommendation system as well that I didn't expect is that because we're forced to find 9 recommendations that are actually good for every skill,
you have to make sure that
we actually have to make sure that they exist, right? And so that means that that it's actually forced us to do a lot more innovation with regard to what support gems exist as well. And then that was another one of those ones which another change that was made, which is in the build that you're doing, is that you and this is actually one that I think will probably sound controversial to PoE 1 players, but is actually really important, is the one support you can only have one of each support gem type on your entire character. So if you have GMP, then GMP is going on one skill and it cannot go on any others. Now there's still LMP, of course, so you can still have 2 multiple projectiles things. And then of course there's all the other various things like pierce and chain and all those other things. So it's not like you don't have the ability to to multiply your projectiles in other ways.
It's which skill you're making, the one that shoots lots of arrows,
and that results in all sorts of interesting questions about there's all sorts of build choices there. Like it actually opened up a huge amount of questions about like what does this go on, was it best on that? I think was a really huge change as well.
You've got enough support gems now probably to mess around with an idea like this.
But the funny thing as well about it was that before we did that change, we were actually having a hell of a time designing support gems for PoE 2. And the reason is because there are so many slots on your character for support gems to go on, so you've got so many skills. We had this philosophy is we don't just want you to take GMP and put it on everything. We don't just want you to take so every single support gem we were trying to say like, okay, how can we design this so you only put it on 1 or 2 skills? And it was actually handcuffing us. And in that first LA build you played, part of the reason why support gems felt so crappy was because all that design constraint was really preventing us from making the support gems interesting. Like, you never felt like you put a support gem and felt more powerful. And the reason why is because the design was always like, oh, well, if we make a support gem that you just put it on and you get like 30% damage, then it means that you're just going to put it on every skill. Yeah. And so then at some point we were like, well, hang on, if our design goal is that you only use each support gem once per character, then why don't we just add that restriction as an actual just like hard-coded thing? And then all of a sudden we're like, well, shit, now support gems can just make your character 20-30% better. Not your character, but that skill 20-30% better. And we can also reintroduce a ton of PoE 1 supports that are like fan favorites again, just like put them all in there, and they all just work again and under the system. We can have just like melee physical damage and stuff like that. It's like you only get to put it on 1 skill, so you have to pick like what is the one that's going to get that. And all of that stuff now becomes viable, and so it suddenly just opened up a huge amount of stuff, and even other stuff that we wouldn't have even be able to do in PoE 1 suddenly works as well. So it's like it's suddenly opened up a huge amount of that stuff, and so we're having a lot of fun right now designing a lot more supports, trying to come up with things that will work for those really hard to support skills. That can be a thing as well. So that's been a huge amount of fun and a lot more interesting design coming out too.
Sounds like a good case for when limitation can actually make something more interesting.
Absolutely, and once again, hard decision to make. We're so worried about having artificial restrictions because like people hate artificial feeling restrictions. Yep. But in this case, it's one that has worked really well.
Excellent. Again, 10 out of 10 change. 100%. Just made everything so much better, and is going to result in the support gems being so much more interesting and meaningful as a result. For sure, it's already heading in that direction.
It sounds like you've taken a bit of a windy road here with Path of Exile 2's skill system and what it all means and what you're doing with it here. And it sounds like you're kind of starting to really home in on.
I think so.
What feels really good. You guys both seem very enthusiastic about both those changes.
For sure. For sure. I mean, there's another one. It's funny, like that we stumbled into recently as well, because requirements for support gems have always been a tricky one. Like requirements in PoE 1 have effectively not mattered very much for a very long time, and we kind of wanted them to matter. So the way that support gem requirements work now, not in the build you're playing, but the way they work now is that when you add a support gem, it adds +5 attributes of the color of that support gem globally to your character. Oh. If you want to put a green support gem on, you'll just need 5 more decks than what you have right now. You'll just need 5 more decks to do it. And so what that means is that you're always 1 passive point away from being able to equip whatever color of support gem that you want. Right. But then at the same time, if you do want to have a strength character that's full of green gems, you are going to need a very significant amount of decks to be able to do that, because every time you but still, it's always the case that you're always just 1 passive point away from doing it. And so that's actually been a game changer as well, as far as the feeling of being able to progress and the feeling of being able to use like the type of support gems you want to use, while still kind of having that more global requirement of like, okay, if you actually just want to trick yourself out with green gems, you're going to have to be a Dex character to be able to do that. I really like that change as well, and it's something that has really improved the feel of supports too.
Yeah, so you feel like you've hit on something there that actually makes requirements do something interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
And with the changes to stats, it sounds like a trade-off. It's much more something you have to consider now as well. Like
absolutely.
Losing 5 strength is 15 life.
Yep, absolutely.
Attributes on gear become a lot better when all of a sudden your 15 dexterity on your ring equals I can now use 3 more support gems. It makes it way more understandable for users who are like, I need to be able to equip this. Again, it's the same thing I was saying earlier about the life or difficulty. You want things to be 1 level away to get an incremental improvement. Yeah, exactly. And if it's like, I need an extra 40 decks to use this, and you're like, oh, sweet, 8 more levels to go, and then I can finally do this. It's so demoralizing, and you don't feel excited about that thing anymore. And by the time you get there, you're not even like, feeling so satisfied.
It sounds like that can make even small passives feel like they do something in that case as well when you're doing that.
We've really tried to make the attributes now like solve your problems. So if you don't have enough mana, it's not like I have to travel. I don't have to wait 8 levels of traveling through the tree to get to some mana. It's like the next level I can get more impactful mana. The next level I can get more impactful life, like using strength and intelligence as those 2 things. It's very important you can immediately solve your problem as opposed to like, I'm going to solve it in 8 levels because... which is, again, the PoE 1 situation where you can certainly be like, I need more life, and it isn't always available for you to just upgrade your gear immediately. That takes farming and time and whatnot. And so if you can't just immediately get more life, or more defense or more whatever, it can feel very, very bad, and it can actually cause people to lose interest and stop playing like quite quickly because they feel like there's nothing they can do.
And in addition to that, because now we have the ability to, any attribute node can be strength. It means that anyone at any time can solve that kind of problem immediately. And the same is true of mana by getting intelligence, because we buffed that as well. I don't remember the number now. But effectively, it's like these 2 problems are now solvable for you immediately. And then the same is true with accuracy. If you do, accuracy has been changed to be a thing that matters much more for range. But if you do have an ability to hit monsters, you can immediately solve that problem in your next level without having to, travel somewhere else, like find it on the tree, all that stuff. And like these 3 things are 3 fundamental things that you need to be able to solve about your character at any time. And if you don't solve them right now, then it sucks. So that's what the attributes are good for that, and the new system of being able to pick the attributes is good for that. So just as a random QL feature that we did in advance, you can swap them without having to respec all the way back there. Like you can swap which attribute they are.
Nice.
That's actually really handy. It's actually really handy when you're reconfiguring what supports you're using to be able to change those out.
Does that cost a respec?
It costs a bit of gold, but the cost of it is cheaper than a respec of changing a node. So that means that
it's a bit more flexible. Yeah, that's handy.
Since the first time you played as well, I don't know if you noticed the item game was quite different than what we had on that first LA demo we did. So you should have been getting a lot more items generally. A lot more opportunities, currency for sure. We made quite substantial changes. There's a lot more gold as well, which allows you to buy things from the vendor. We made things sell for more. We made prices cheaper. Like we did like a lot of things around, and the gold thing in particular was pretty good because gold is a good way for solving problems. To broaden the scope of this bit a little bit, some games have what you might call like smart drops and so on, where they like drop stuff for your character. But we've always been really against that because to us it feels really bad, the idea that if I'm playing this character, it means I can't find stuff for other characters. And also there's this kind of concept of the near miss of like, oh, a bow drop, but I'm not a bow user, and it's like either I can use that on a different character, or I'm like, I guess another thing will happen next time. But gold actually serves as effectively like smart drops in a way, because it allows you to buy what you want from the shop. So if we increase the proportion, we can effectively tweak the degree to which you can pick what your drops are versus not by changing the relative ratio of gold to regular drops in the economy. And effectively, we increased the ratio a little bit more towards gold than what we had initially in the first LA demo we did. And that has meant now that you can solve your problems more easily by buying things from the shop and just fix the issues that you have.
That creates like a bit of a safety net, like a baseline for what you can expect players to have access to.
That was absolutely an issue we had where we're already a game that has a crazy degree between the bottom and the top as far as like player skill goes, and like all these other things, like just RNG even. So by having that gold safety net, it means that you can fix your own problems. It sort of brings up the minimum without increasing the maximum very much, which I think has been very good.
Even quest rewards, we added gold to a number of quest rewards as well. Certainly, it helps a lot.
And then the other thing we did as well, which is a lot more subtle and players may not even notice, is that we have a lot of hard-coded drops through the campaign that you can just sort of find as you go through. So there's just all these little side things, like like specific chests that you'll find that will drop, like here's an extra place that drops an uncut support gem. There's a really subtle one in Red Veil where we make sure that we drop the chests. There's like these chests of weapons weapons that fall apart, and we make sure that at least one T2 white base of every weapon type drops in that area somewhere. So as you're just exploring that zone, you will definitely find something to replace your weapon with, and then you can usually use currency on it to improve it and so on as well. So like we're just kind of making sure that that minimum is brought up. And there's even things like there's like a white ring that drops in the graveyard. There's like a special grave that you can open up, and there's like I think there's like some lore object there about like I buried the wedding ring of my like ancestor here. It's like like let's steal that. So that's the
perfect grave robbing jewelry.
Exactly. We've got little things like there was I don't know if when you were playing through you found the secret lever you can pull that opens like a little tomb thing that opens up. There's like a bunch of gold down there, things like that.
I'm gonna try and find that.
Yeah. There's all sorts of just cool little things that we've added through the game to once again, if you're like racing through, you're probably not going to get that stuff, but then also you're probably a better player. But if you're a player who is taking your time, you're going through, you're a first time player, you're going to find more of that stuff that kind of serves as almost a catch up mechanic to kind of give you the items you would need to be able to do a bit better. So the idea there is we give you a reward for exploration, and we expect newer players to be doing more of that exploration. If you having trouble with a boss, we want it to be the case that if I just explore the area, I'm going to find some extra things that are going to help me to be able to progress with that.
So not only have you got these big like flagship like zone bosses that drop like a specific permanent character buff, but now you've also got scattered throughout the zone hidden chests, little secret Easter eggs, even things you're hiding from each other, it seems, from what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I know. There was that quest that Mark added that I came across something. I was like, what the hell? Like, where did this come from?
I added a thing where some monsters, without spoiling it too much, but there's a kind of type of monster, and they drop half an amulet, and then there's another type of monster later in the act that drops another half of a medallion, and then you can like if you put those two pieces in, you then get like a quest reward bonus where you get to pick either representing one monster or the other, and then that's a permanent bonus for your character. But like when people first got it, they're like, what is this half medallion for?
I just wasn't expecting to see something in my own game that I hadn't heard about before.
Just a hidden quest you had no idea about.
Exactly.
It's fun.
Yeah, They're
sure. Fun. I mean, that was me testing the waters of like having something quite secret, and it's pretty rare, to drop things in an area that are used in another area. Like in PoE, that's like pretty. I mean, you have obviously the core campaign quest items that carry through. That's fine, but like kind of secondary random objects like that, it's very rare to see that. And so I kind of wanted to gauge people's reactions on like maybe we'll try adding some of that and kind of see how it feels. It adds a whole bunch of flavor and depth to the world in some regards. So I don't know. It seemed to have a pretty positive response so far, and I'm looking forward to adding more random stuff that Jonathan can find without knowing about it.
The other one that I've been really enjoying is the specific rares that we've been putting in. So that's been a fun one. So in some cases we had extra reskins of monsters lying around that we were like, hey, we could just like use this as an extra little rare encounter. We make them rare because they're not like unique now. The standard for what a unique bosses in PoE 2 is obviously like way more ridiculous than what it was in PoE 1. So like you'd have just like in PoE 1 you'd have a unique that was like, I don't know, what was that guy who was in the crossroads? Like I don't know.
He's in Southern Forest now. He moved camps, but he's just like I can't remember, Call off the head staver or something. And he's like, just like I've got heavy strike.
Yeah,
like that's his whole thing.
Yeah, that was the standard of a unique in the campaign in PoE 1, and now it's like some giant multi-phase like crazy boss. But it's still fun to have those like sort of little encounters with like a specific guy, and so there's that one in the forest, which is that witch monster, and what we actually did for that one is we just took a monster that made thematic sense from Act 5, and we moved it early and then had it as a rare encounter, and that's like kind of a fun thing. There was like that there's like that little like treant summoning thing going on, and
there's like a Stonehenge looking thing, and later in Act 1 you get a few like treant things that are summoning a big thing, and it's actually again just another later acts monster brought earlier with some recolor, like a slight adjustment to the skills.
Yeah, there's that like ghost guy in one of the crypts.
It's just like there's like a rare chest, and there's just like a ghost in front of it. He's just hanging out, and when you run into the ghost, he kind of like does something, it releases a shockwave and it revives a whole bunch of monsters around you, and like
cool.
damn, this freaking chest was a trap.
Once again, that was another thing I didn't know about until I ran into it. So that was a fun one. There's like we're trying to make sure that every area has like at least 2 or 3 just like random things that you can find in it like could be as I said, could be chests, could be monsters, could be like or it could be a unique boss that's like a whole thing. You don't know what you might find. And that honestly is some of the funnest stuff to design. And it's actually like it's funny because it's like, you can actually lose sight of that stuff when you're doing the whole giant content schedule of like making areas and like bosses and so on. And then like this stuff doesn't even really like relative to the rest of the game. It's so fast to make, and yet it's like the fun stuff that I think people remember, and it really has a lot of life to the world. So it would be a shame if we didn't have the time to be able to do that stuff. Like it really is cool. Look, there's this little secret entrance here, and what's that?
It's partly kind of even what's happening with the campaign improvements in PoE 1.
Yes.
They're the same kind of
100%.
Drive or motivation for that.
And that stuff, like it's interesting because it's actually hard to know like how that stuff is being received by the player base, because it's not often mentioned. It's not like a big PR value thing.
Yeah, it's not like a title grabbing thing, but it is a thing that feels good and is exciting and makes things more interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we add like we're trying to add like sort of 20 to 30 of those with each just little details like that with each thing. But like ideally, PoE 2 is just filled with that stuff already. Just like lots of
the hope is to release with without having to then do it over many, many leagues like we are for PoE 1, you can just release PoE 2 with all of that in place. And I mean, sure, you can always add more later and evolve stuff because eventually you might want to. Like more world building is always great, but at least there's enough there. You really want it to be that like every time you play through,
find a few new ones.
You might find something different in a certain act because you just happen to miss it the first time. I mean, unless you're being ultra thorough and like full clearing every single area with like exact precision and taking your sweet time, in which case, good on you. But like a lot of characters might just miss certain points of interest and they find it the next time. And
we can even do some of them. We can even do some of them as not always spawning. Like I know in the in Act 2, there was those 2 different. We've got like a couple of different of those the crazy statue rooms. And there's like different ones for that.
So as long as you have the deterministic outcome, if there is one, the reward bound to both or to many, or there's some way to do that. Ideally you'd have it that you'd actually generate different ones as you play through as well. So
improving kind of the experience of multiple campaign playthroughs here as well for different characters playing out differently, but even the same character playing out different.
Right. I mean, I don't know if you've I might have talked to you about this before, but with regard to multiple campaign playthroughs, like the world map in PoE 2 is a random map, and it can have a different layout between different leagues. So like the overall layout of the whole act changes around, and that can actually change like what stuff you can find in it as well. So we really want the idea of like the each time you play that campaign, it does feel like there's something new and different going on with it, and that's something that that with the stuff we've got going on in PoE 2, we can now sort of do like much better than what we did in PoE 1.
You're both increasing like the randomness through that system, but also much more handcrafted content as well through these like random rare monsters and unique monsters and little chests that are scattered around that are done maybe sometimes randomly as well. It's
sort of funny because we, I think, use procedural generation differently than what I think a lot of like different games do. Like when a lot of players hear procedural generation, what they're kind of imagining is like an infinite amount of bad kind of like mediocre content. But for us, procedural generation is making like we handcraft lots of little things, and you can find like that they're going to be in areas, but like the procedural generation is a way to make it so that we can create levels quickly while still handcrafting everything about them that makes them unique, and also that every time you play through the area it feels a bit different enough so that there's still some surprises, even if those surprises are handcrafted things. Like what you run into just is going to be different, like just really helps a lot. That's a very different thing, I think, than what a lot of other procedural generation games do.
It seems like your kind of system for giving loot to the player or tools or gear or uncut gems or whatever it is that you need to give the player to ensure kind of like a minimum quality of their playthrough is getting smarter. Like you have the ability now to, you're mentioning things like if players don't get this, then later on they'll get something else. Or more.
So we actually have what we call like second chances for certain things. So if you didn't run into, this particular chest that gave you an extra skill gem in, in the second area, then that means that when in the third area, when you find, the like witch's cottage, for example, then that's going to drop that extra skill gem instead. And so by doing second chances for some of the stuff, we can just kind of try to make sure that because all that stuff is just still randomly run into, that we can still get that sort of minimum playthrough. And we're not going to make it so it's like, that thing's going to follow you through the whole game or something like that, but we do want to make sure that at least there's two chances at everything, so that even if you don't run into it, you've still got you still have a reasonably good experience.